Yeah.
None of this.
All right, so welcome everyone. Welcome to the Tools and Technology Seminar Series. We're going to go ahead and get started. I do see a few new faces, so just a reminder, or to let anyone who's new know, this is basically just a weekly seminar series at this time on Thursdays. Talk about new tools, technologies, methodologies. Actually, they're not necessarily new. They're either in development, they're recently developed, or they maybe are old but maybe being used in a novel way by researchers. So we have a great lineup throughout the semester. So today, I'm pleased to present Jake Carlson, Amy Neeser, and Scott Martin from the U of M Library, who are going to talk to us about Deep Blue data.
All right. Thanks, Marcy. So I'm Jake Carlson. I'm the Research Data Services Manager for the library. Deep Blue Data is part of a larger suite of services. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the services and sort of where they came from and what we hope to help support you in doing with your research data. I'm then going to turn it over to Amy and Scott to talk more about Deep Blue Data and the services we offer through our data repository. So I'm going to start off with a pop quiz. When you think of a library, what's the first thing you think of? Books. But hopefully you don't think of that, right? This is not a library. This may be a faculty office or my office on occasion, but it's not a library. This is a library. And the difference is we don't just get books or get journals. We organize them so that they're easy to find, that they're grouped together on like subjects so that you may come across other things of interest based upon where you're looking. We provide structures to make them available, to show them to people. We have means that you can access this information. You can go to the library and pick out a book off the shelf and check it out. And we have structures in place to preserve this information. So we don't just buy it and let it sort of slowly die a horrible death. We ensure that it's taken care of and stewarded and connected to a particular community. So the challenge is these days that the work environments, don't necessarily work like the office. They look like this. You have your desktop and you have stuff sort of spread all over the place, and who knows what exactly is there. And maybe that's okay for you because you know exactly what this particular file is and how it's organized. But somebody else coming to look at your desktop will be totally lost by all of this. This is a chaos. And so again, this is okay if it's just you, but increasingly. Now it stopped working. Yes. So increasingly, your data is not just something that you work on, but it's something that others work on with you if you're doing collaborations, if you're working with partners. And increasingly, funding agencies, publishers, others expect you to do more with your data than just let it die a slow, horrible death in your computer. Funding agencies are now requiring a data management plan, asking you, how are you going to share your data? How are you going to make it available? If you get funding from an agency, you can't just sit on it. You have to share it in some way, shape, or form. How are you going to do that? Publishers also expect that data will be included or made available somehow through the publication. I've had a number of folks tell me that in their field, they can't just read a paper and really understand what the finding is all about. They have to see the data to more fully understand the significance of the finding, to really sort of understand the depth or meaning of the finding, and to be able to trust the finding as well. It's not just putting it out and saying, this is what I found, trust me. It's providing some more evidence or some more ways to reproduce that research. So in fact, we're more confident that the results are what they're being reported. Collaboration can really bring some complexity, especially if you're working with folks from different disciplines. People sort of have different community norms and practices about how one works with data, how one manages data, how one labels data. And when you get together, it can be difficult. It's almost like speaking a different language from working with one person to another. So how do you share data effectively even within your own groups? That can be challenging as well. Data really needs to be well described and documented to have value outside of the place where it was generated. So again, you may know where your data are and how you label them, or what actually that number 3 means in your data file because you're familiar with how you generate it and put it into work. But anybody else taking a look at it wouldn't be able to make sense of it or understand it. And so we're looking at how data are described and documented to have value beyond its place of origin. And then finally, we have a lot of pressure now to share data, but how do you do that in a way that's just not, oh, I have to share the data, so here's something. But how do you do it in a way that adds value and impact to your work? How do you get credit, appropriate credit, for the work that you do? So how can libraries help in this sort of new environment of increased use of data and sharing data? Well, we have a long history of taking disparate sets of information and creating structures and platforms that present them in an organized fashion. So we have information from sociologists, from art historians, from civil engineers, from biochemists, and our system, the way that we organize it, makes it available and accessible to anybody who may have an interest in those particular topics. We also understand the ecosystems of how information is organized and shared and managed in different disciplines. So librarians, we have a certain type of librarian called a liaison librarian, and they have a connection to a particular discipline or department, and one of their roles really is to understand how is information shared, what kind of norms and practices are there in structuring information and making it available and ensuring its longevity. So we have people who are dedicated to understanding and applying that information. And then finally, we think in the long term. I think we're one of the few agencies in the university that is tasked with not just acquiring information and making it available, but thinking about how do we preserve it and preserve its value for the long term, beyond just the sort of the heat of the moment. And so recognizing this, we're looking at how can we apply what we do or have done with books and journals and other sort of print materials. How do we apply that now to the world of data to help you do what you need to do or want to do in managing, sharing, and preserving the work that you develop through your data sets? And so good data sets don't just happen. They are worked on, they're developed over time. And so we're really looking at, can we structure our services to help you do more with your data to the data lifecycle? So at the beginning, can we help you find data sets? It's sort of an extension of the work that we typically do in helping you find information, including that information in data sets as well as, again, books and journal articles. So helping you track down the data sets you might need to inform your research or to give you ideas or to give you a sense of what's been done already in the area of study that you might want to pursue. And then writing up data management planning. So not just the 2-page plan that you might need to submit to the NSF or the data sharing plan you might need to develop for the NIH, but really what are the kinds of things you might want to think about when you're just getting started in terms of structuring your data and how it's going to be generated, how it's going to be managed, how it might be organized, both to benefit people later on down the line, but also to benefit yourself as you work through the data, rather than having to spend time sort of thinking about, well, what did I do 3 months ago or 6 months ago, and having to sort of recreate the wheel. Can we help you structure the data set in a way that makes it easier for you to use and develop and grow during the project itself? And then towards the middle of the project, we're not going to be doing the data collection and data analysis, obviously, we're librarians, but we can help you consider what kind of documentation you might want to generate in order to make your data meaningful and valuable to others when you get to the point where you're ready to share it. We want to think about what kind of metadata, some structured information, some structured description you might want to apply for your data, again, to make it more useful both for yourself and for others later on down the line. And then how might you organize the data so that it's not impenetrable, but fairly easy to understand how the different components of your data set fit together to make them more accessible and more usable. And then towards the end, which Scott and Mimi will be talking about a bit more, how can we help you share your data in a way that gets you credit for putting it out there, for how you might want to publish your data set using DOIs or other sort of identifiers to enable your data set to be cited by others, again, to give you that credit. And how might you want to preserve your data? What are the important elements to preserve? How might you need to structure your data or prepare your data for preservation so it's not just out and available at the moment, but it has some long-lasting duration, and again, it can be cited as an object of scholarship. And so these are sort of a summarization of the 7 types of research data services that we offer. What I didn't cover, we also offer visualization services that are offered. Marcy actually has a hand in that, and I imagine you're probably aware of the kind of things that she does. But we can help you consider how might you want to tell your story through data and give you some ideas about what kinds of software or approaches you might want to take to tell an effective story, to communicate the research that you've done in effective ways. And so with that, we're going to focus more on the sharing and publication and preservation aspects. I'm going to turn this over to Amy and Scott to talk about Deep Blue data.
Yeah, well, that works. So as Jake said, we're going to be talking about a particular facet of the Research Data Services suite at the library, which is a product that we call Deep Blue Data. Actually, probably should have put these slides in the other order now I think about it. So let's start here. How many people have used Deep Blue before or know what Deep Blue is? How many non-librarians in the room have used Deep Blue before or know what Deep Blue is? Okay, Gil knows. Okay. So Deep Blue is the university's institutional repository. This is an online repository run by the library for depositing, archiving, and making accessible scholarly products of the university. Deep Blue has been online for about a dozen years now and holds several 100,000 files, the vast majority of which are PDFs of scholarly papers written by researchers at the university. There are a number of other things in there as well, but they tend to be along that theme of sort of print format documents. So PDFs, Word files, PowerPoint presentations, things that humans are going to read and understand. Deep Blue Data is an expansion of that brand into the world of making data available, archiving data, sharing data. So material that is probably going to be consumed by, not necessarily by humans, probably by computers computationally. So we've created a system here that is optimized for data access and preservation rather than human readable document access and preservation. Deep Blue Data accepts a wide variety of things. We're conceiving this as a cross-disciplinary repository, so we're not confining this to just STEM disciplines on campus or just humanities and social sciences. We'll accept anything from any researchers on campus, and we'll accept data in any format. Now, obviously, because we're librarians and we have particular ideas about the ways that people should be sharing data, we're going to encourage you to use open, non-proprietary, and widely used formats when that's possible. We recognize that that will not always be possible, and so we're willing to work with you to get, for example, proprietary instrument files that are an integral part of your data set into Deep Blue Data. We're also not putting any size limits up front on the data sets that we take. We will take all sizes that are technically possible. What that means is whatever we can find a way to shoehorn into the system. So the interface that Amy is going to be demoing in a couple of minutes is a web browser interface. Obviously, web browsers have some limitations in terms of size of material that you can easily upload and download. I think about 2 gigs is the limit that we're going to be able to ingest before your browser starts to time out. We will take larger data sets. What ingesting larger data sets means is that we need to come up with a way to physically transfer things into the server. So if that means we need to come over with a handcuffed briefcase and pick up some hard drives and then carry them back and put them on the server, we can do that. We really want to do whatever is going to be necessary to meet the needs of researchers in terms of the size of data that they have stored. And the library's made a commitment to fund Deep Blue Data with an eye towards storing as much material as is possible rather than trying to narrow the size range that we're talking about.
So they talk to bioinformatics people?
We've talked to a wide variety of people.
The run of data off of sequencers, like, it's close to a terabyte now?
Mm-hmm. Right. Not all of which you're necessarily going to want to save for publication, right? So that's the thing about Deep Blue Data, is that it's intended as a publication repository, not as sort of dark storage for things you think you might need later, right?
A lot of that goes into the analysis. It's the data,
Mm-hmm.
and without it, you can't reproduce.
Right. So we'd want to have conversations about what is necessary to publish for particular needs. So.
Furthermore, you have to go back to that data because what settings you used in your programs can change the result.
Yeah. There lies the documentation of what needs to get captured and how is it being explained.
You can't, if you have a different program or different parameters that you use, you couldn't do that going from the analyzed stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to go back to that data.
Yeah, we really do want to have negotiations as to what is the most important to save for your particular purpose. So if the idea is, I really want a data set that it helps explain my findings, that's a different set of data than I really want a reference set of data that others can use and do analysis by. It's a different level of depth in terms of documentation and in terms of structure and such.
And if it's stored somewhere like in a public system, do you have a way of inserting links in here instead of? In other words, a lot of things require data to be deposited at NCBI.
Right.
So do you have a way of linking?
So we have a way of linking to papers right now, but I think what you're talking about is much more in depth. To the data itself, right? So if the data is deposited at NCBI and that is your main mode of access to it, then that probably is the way that you should go. So we are putting out Deep Blue Data as a solution for people who may not have a community resource like NCBI, or for whom that community resource isn't appropriate for whatever reason. But if there's a better resource out there that is more connected to your community, that's more able to handle your particular needs, we are still very much willing to sit down and help consult with you to figure out how does it go into that particular place. So this is a solution, not the solution.
Yeah, we're limiting not based on size, but based on needs. So we're working with a professor in astronomy right now, and how much data does he? I think like 30 terabytes, I want to say.
Yeah, those guys can crank it up.
Yeah, they really
Exactly,
do.
yeah. So we're working to ingest that and develop a workflow around that.
So it may actually not be a bad idea to be able to create entries that could link out to the NCBI record, so they would still be affiliated with U of M,
Yep.
and people could easily find it and make it more discoverable, not only by searching NCBI,
Yep.
but if they're searching
It
U
can
of
be
M.
connected to the paper that's associated.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we've talked about that, and I think right now we have Deep Blue Data, and it's a platform, and we have a certain idea of how people want to engage with that platform, but we recognize that there's many other possibilities as well. And so if you have a particular interest in terms of like perhaps putting pointer records in Deep Blue that would point to a different data set, we haven't done that yet, but we're definitely open to possibilities.
Yeah.
We'd love to talk more about what would the value proposition be, both for you and for the community, and how what we have might enable those value propositions to come to pass.
We're always looking for test cases, so.
Okay, so why deposit in Deep Blue Data? I probably don't need to convince anybody here that data sharing is an important goal. Deep Blue Data provides a way, as we said, not necessarily the way for any particular application, but a way for you to make your research data visible to the world in a protected and secure fashion. This is especially useful, as Jake was alluding to earlier, in terms of grant compliance. Increasingly, funding agencies are requiring deposit of data for public access after the grant project is complete. Deep Blue Data gives you one means by which you can demonstrate to your funding agency that you are meeting that requirement using a resource that is better funded, more well supported than just putting stuff up on your website, assuming you don't have anywhere else to put stuff. We also make it easier for other people who are using your data to cite it. You can assign a DOI, a digital object identifier, to a data set in Deep Blue Data. Most of the emerging standards around citing data heavily leverage DOIs, and so this is one more way to make it easy to cite that material as they go in. And then preservation. The library is committed to preserving data that's deposited in Deep Blue Data. Now, the question that comes up there, of course, is what does preserve mean? At a minimum level, that means that the bits you give us, we promise to faithfully store and spit back out when somebody asks for them. For certain highly used formats, PDFA would be one of those, we commit to not only storing the bits and spitting the bits back out, but as those storage formats are updated by the communities that generate the standards for them, we commit to migrating the files that are there to stay in compliance with newer forms of, say, the PDF standard format. We're still working out for which formats exactly we will be doing that. Some of those widely used formats are open source and well documented enough for that to happen. Others are not. We're always looking to engage with researchers in conversations about which formats we should have more developed preservation plans for. But at a minimum, bits in, bits out, we preserve things faithfully for you. Things Deep Blue Data does not accept. We do not currently accept data that are under the purview of the research compliance programs. So anything subject to export controls or things that present conflict of interest for the university or researchers, or whose distribution otherwise constitute a violation of research ethics or compliance, which is to say, at least at the moment, HIPAA.
That's your next one.
HIPAA data. Yeah, so sensitive data. data containing personally identifiable information, and administrative data from the workings of the university. The university has an infrastructure of its own set up for storing and making administrative data available internally. Deep Blue data is not that. If administrative data is being used for research purposes and we have the consent and agreement of the parties involved in the library, then we can host administrative data in Deep Blue data, but those are going to be relatively few and far between, I think, in terms of actual applications. Right, and sensitive data, so things covered by HIPAA or FERPA, other appropriate federal laws. Questions about any of this? Yes.
What about stuff that's simply copyrighted and maybe it's licensed for use by the university community but nobody else? Do you do anything about that?
So material that has been produced by third parties that we've licensed for our use?
Yes, although I'm thinking more of a case where at the university we were doing sort of not quite contract work, but work for a third party that put restrictions on what we could do with the stuff we produced.
Yeah, if you're going to deposit data into Deep Blue data, you have to have the authority to do so. So if you are bound by a third-party contract or so, we need to have some assurance that the third party is aware and has signed off on your ability to deposit into Deep Blue data.
Okay, but I'm not so much concerned with that as once it's in Deep Blue data, is there any way you can put restrictions on it?
Which gets actually to my next slide, so that's a great segue. So accessing Deep Blue data. The way we've structured Deep Blue data is that everything deposited into it is open access. Anybody who has a web browser anywhere in the world can come in, browse our collections, and download data. So in terms of if we have an agreement with somebody else that restricts data to only on-campus use or only members of the university community, this is not going to be your platform. That's not the way that we've structured it. Now, depositing into Deep Blue data is substantially more restricted. As with Deep Blue, our documents repository, we're making this a repository of research products of the campus, of members of the U of M community, which we're defining this way. Current UM faculty and research staff on all three campuses, so folks from Flint and Dearborn, can deposit as well, and we've been out there talking to our colleagues at those libraries about how to promote Deep Blue data to their campuses. Multi-institutional collaborative groups that include at least one U of M researcher, who will then presumably be the person doing the depositing. Proxies who are designated by UM faculty and staff. This is something that we've run into. This is actually related to an issue that we came up with when we were starting to work with NIH preprint deposit, was that frequently the people trying to deposit preprints of papers for NIH grant compliance were not the researchers, they were designated administrators within the health system or other parts of the university. So with that in mind, we want to make it possible for faculty and staff to designate proxies who can deposit data under their accounts, whether they're grad students or other research staff within your particular labs, or administrators within the UM health system who are working to coordinate particular labs, whatever. The proxy system is designed to allow that to happen. We do also allow students, both graduate and undergraduate students, to deposit with faculty permission. We don't want students just chucking in, whatever they feel like putting in, stuff from their undergrad classes, which might not meet sort of general scholarly standards for data publication. We want some sort of faculty control on that. Questions about any of this? Nope. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Amy, and we'll see how this works.
Thank you. I'm hoping I don't need this. I'm thinking the internet will work. Seem to. Okay, so I'm Amy. I'm the research data curation librarian, and I oversee Deep Blue data. So if you email deepbluedata@umich.edu, I'm the one who will probably be answering your email. So we've been talking about this thing. I think the best way is actually to look at it and dig into it. So if you wouldn't mind. Are you going to drive for me, Scott?
I had planned to.
This is awesome.
Provided I can get the mouse back.
Oh.
There it is. Okay.
Yes, please. So we've talked a little bit about Deep Blue. So if you go to deepblue.lib.umich.edu, you'll see that there's a new page that says Deep Blue is expanding, and you'll see here's the dichotomy of, here's our documents that Scott was talking about, and then here's the data kind of portion of Deep Blue data. So go in there. So here's what it looks like. The two really big things that you can do is you can either browse data or you can deposit data. So let's click Browse first and take a look at what this looks like. So if you hit Browse, you'll see everything that's in this repository. We've been open. We did a beta launch last February, so I guess we've been open a year now. Not quite a year, yes. And we did a public launch in September. So we have 57 data sets in here. So this is looking at everything. If you want to get a little bit more specific, we have some really basic facets here on the side. So if you want to look by, discipline, say, and you want to look at, what's in engineering, you can click on that, and then that will bring up everything that researchers have identified as engineering, for example. So if you want to click on one of these, take a look at what one looks like. So here's the description. So this is the metadata that the depositor has entered about the work. And we'll take a look at what doing a deposit looks like too, but we've kept it pretty simple. Just really the title, the methodology, description, the creator. Again, here are the disciplines that we've had them select. Keywords, date coverage, language. Here's the DOI, the digital object identifier that Scott had mentioned. So this is what you can actually stick in your paper to allow people to cite you with that DOI.
You don't have an entry for the size of the file, size of the data.
You know what? We don't. And that came up recently. I think we were at class talking to them, and they said, how do we know how big it is before we start downloading it? And I thought that was a brilliant suggestion, so we're going to be adding that.
We actually had a meeting this morning talking about different metadata we might need to add to this, and that came up as part of it.
Exactly.
Question about the DOI.
Yes.
How are those assigned? Do they get assigned automatically?
No, definitely not, because not everybody wants a DOI, or people perhaps want to make more changes to their upload before minting the DOI. That's like the final step.
But is it done through the site, though?
It is, yeah. So we can take a look at that when we do the deposit. It's just a button, and you click it. It's yeah. Okay, so that was the metadata, and then here are the actual files attached to the data set. So you can see the name, the format, what data was uploaded. But yes, size is not there, and I think that that's a really...
So this just has parameters. This is molecular simulation. That's usually gigantic files.
It looks like it's just an Excel sheet, though. So
Just summary data.
Yeah, but I guess
Yeah.
it's summary data, given the title.
yes, yeah. I'm not sure if we reviewed this one
I
yet.
think this is new. I don't
Yeah,
remember
this is a
seeing
newer one, so we have not gone through and done a big review of it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So that's just really what it looks like. And then you can download those individual files if you wish. Yeah.
Yeah,
What's
it is
the-
new. Came in on the 19th.
Oh, yeah, they're new. Great. All right, do you want to step back one screen, Scott? Let's see. I also would like to maybe show what a collection looks like. So if you want to get rid of that discipline facet, and then just kind of search through. I think there's one on the first page. Maybe not.
Search for neighborhood effects. That should bring
I
it.
think next page should be fine. That'll come up.
Yeah, there it is.
So, so we have two different icons here. The kind of single box. This is like a single work or deposit. People also have the option of depositing collections of data. That's what this kind of multi-box thing is. We're going to be redesigning our icons, I think. But if you click on that, that really allows researchers. So I should step back for a minute. So a work can contain multiple files. A deposit can contain many, many files. We have some that have a couple hundred. And then you can bundle multiple deposits together into a collection if they're thematically related. Or I saw somebody make a collection for all of their labs deposits, things like that. So this is a way of describing a group of works. And if you scroll down, then you can attach those into the collection, if that makes sense. Okay. Sounds good. So that's what that looks like.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So what strategy would you use for like versioning? So I publish a paper, I create a tool and some data that goes with that. But then every year after that, I refresh the data, and there's a new version of it that comes out. Would that be a collection?
That's a perfect question. That's a perfect use case, I would say, for a collection.
Okay.
So each time you publish, that would be a work or a deposit, and then when you make a new one, you'd make a new deposit, but bundle all of those into a collection.
So you wouldn't want to remove something. Is what you're saying.
Correct. Yes. Yep.
So would you
Um,
as the depositor want to remove? Well, I may, because it's outdated now. Right.
So as the library, we are very concerned with keeping track of what the scholarly record is. So we're not going to delete anything once it's in Deep Blue data. We would just say, this is version 2, this is version 3.
But in the metadata or something, we would say this is deprecated, this is no longer the most recent
Exactly.
version.
It's been
Please
replaced
use
by
this.
Yep,
this
pointed
version.
forward, exactly.
Yeah, but it's important to have a scholarly record because you may have published or presented off, version 1. People who encounter that publication would need to be able to understand version 1 of what you did, rather than version 3, which may not be relevant for the particular paper you put out at that time.
Especially if you assign a DOI, which is then going to be resolving to the version 1. There needs to be something there to say, this is the version that this published work was based on. There is also an updated version that links out here.
Yeah. Yep.
Have you talked to or worked with ICPSR? Because they're doing very similar things
Yes.
with this on social.
Definitely. Yeah, we're working very closely with ICPSR. And we want to make sure that we're not overlapping. So we have pretty different models. They heavily curate things that come in.
Except for Open ICPSR, they do not.
They do not.
Open
Right.
ICPSR is different, yeah. And as Scott mentioned earlier, this is really for all disciplines. So it's kind of like a more shallow, like a wider net, I guess, for more disciplines, whereas they go very, very deep for the social sciences. So if a researcher comes to us and says, hey, I have social science data, we want to make sure that ICPSR isn't a better home first before taking it. I think, Marcy, didn't somebody contact us and we told them to develop to deposit in GenBank?
Yes.
That would have been a better home.
Yeah.
So that's really our goal, is to make sure that the data gets into the best place. Maybe it's not Deep Blue data. That's definitely okay. But yeah, we talk to ICPSR a lot.
Yeah, one of the things that we do that ICPSR doesn't is we are willing to come to your office, sit down, work with you, go through the data, and figure out where is the best home, and then work with you to get it there, get it sort of structured and properly submitted so that it is representative of the value that you created.
In that respect, it's sort of an intermediate model between the deeply curated regular ICPSR repository and the very, very shallowly curated Open ICPSR. We have some consultative services that go with Deep Blue data that I don't think you'd get if you just came and said, hey, I want to put something in Open ICPSR.
Yeah. And now would probably be a good time to mention, it's a good segue. So after deposits, we actually do a review of them, and we do kind of like a post-deposit curation. So I'm working with a PhD student, and he and I go through, look at it, make sure that we don't have any recommendations, like maybe you forgot a README file that would be helpful for somebody needing to know how to run your code, things like that. And so he and I are working with the subject librarians, like Scott, for example, and then getting back to the researcher and saying, we recommend these changes. Here are the things we're willing to do. Would you do these things? Kind of negotiating that.
In an ideal world, we'd have those conversations before deposits happen, usually because someone would come to a subject liaison like myself or like Marcy and say, hey, I'm thinking about, this is the work I'm doing with data. What do I need to do to follow best practices for this discipline? We could counsel, well, you probably want to think about these metadata formats and bundling things in these ways. And that sort of thing.
Think about file naming in advance. Exactly. Yeah.
But in the absence of that, coming back to things and saying, hey, glad you put us in Deep Blue data. We took a look and we have some suggestions that we think might make your data set even better. Can we talk to you about them?
Exactly.
That works too.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, because the ultimate goal, it's to get stuff in there and to preserve it, but it's also to make that stuff usable so that other people can come find it, use it, and go from there. All right, so if you wouldn't mind going back home. So we'll take a look at what a deposit looks like. So you can either deposit, once you're logged in, you'll see this nice ribbon here. Otherwise, you can click deposit your work there.
Are you guys going to do full text indexing of the metadata?
Metadata, definitely. Yes. Yep.
When you get past 57 or something, browsing is
Yes.
correct.
Yeah, so we talked a bit. We do full text of indexing of the metadata, and you can find it, through through the data sites website and through Google in many cases.
Mhm.
We are also looking at how do we expand our browsing capabilities, because we have 4 or 5 facets, but they're still fairly broad and fairly chunky.
Yeah.
So we're looking at how can we further refine what you can do. We also have a search bar up at the top, so you can type in a particular term and search it that particular way. So you're not limited to browse.
Definitely. Great question. So this is what the deposit form looks like if you were to make a deposit. Some of these look familiar from looking at the record from before, title, creator, method. You'll see that these ones are required. Keep scrolling, description. We also have date coverage that's not required because a date doesn't always make sense with the data set. We have so you can add a date range too. So if I was collecting samples from this date until this date, that kind of thing, you can add a beginning and end. Go ahead and click it. It's cool. Yeah. We also ask that depositors select a Creative Commons license to license their data under. A lot of data repositories pick that for the depositor, but we really wanted you guys to make your own choice about how you want your data to be used. So we have 3 options. The CC0, that's just I'm putting it out there. Anybody can use it. That's it. We also have the attribution. So that means I'm putting my data out there, but people have to cite me. I would say that's probably what most people are using. People like to be cited. And then we also have the attribution non-commercial. So that's, you have to cite me and it can't be used for commercial purposes. So that's another option. All right. And
How often is that one chosen?
non-commercial? Not very often. I would
People
say.
Just like to see their work used.
Exactly.
Exactly.
If they get a royalty anyway, they don't license.
That's true.
Exactly. Yeah. So most people pick just, attribution, just cite me. All right. And then discipline. We just have the really top level disciplines right now. So science or social science. You can add multiple. We're working on adding, deeper down. So science, biology.
We're pulling this actually from the library catalog, or the same base that is populating the library catalog. So you see like news and current events, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense in this context. So we are looking at how do we refine this and make it more applicable for data.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Keyword is an option. You can put as many keywords as you like. So this might be words that describe your work that aren't elsewhere in the metadata, so that they come up when you do a search, as you were describing. We also have language, and then citation to related material. So this is if you have a paper published somewhere else, whether it be in Deep Blue or in a journal, you can put the citation and link to it. So the data and the paper are actually linked together, which is nice. We also have this deposit on behalf of, so this is the proxy feature that Scott was talking about. So if somebody has authorized you to deposit for them, like our project manager has authorized me to deposit for her, I can just go ahead and drop down and pick that, which is nice. And then finally, we've added this draft functionality. So if you want to mock things up and show it to the rest of your team, or you're not quite ready to publish yet, you can put it in draft, and then it won't be available to the public, and you can continue to work on it. And actually, Scott, if you scroll back up, we probably should have just put in some some junk into the required fields, if you wouldn't mind. Then I'll just show you real quick what the upload looks like. And if you could make this a draft so it doesn't go public, that would be great. Otherwise, we'll get all excited. We'll see a deposit, and then we're like, oh, Scott. Yeah.
Already draft.
Perfect. We're depositing on behalf of Nabila. She'll be
like, what?
She'll be pleasantly surprised. Yes. So you click next or save, and then here you'll see a summary of what you have just done. Here's the Mint DOI button for when you're ready for that. If you keep scrolling down, this is where you're going to upload your files. So it looks just like any kind of, browse your computer. You can select individual files, or you can select an entire folder. So you don't have to upload individual files. We have some that have like 300 some files attached, and that would be obnoxious to do that, 300 times.
Good. I'll upload your presentation.
Nice. Perfect. So you notice when Scott did that, nothing happened. And because he has to click Start Upload, and he can't because he has to agree to the terms first. And I mentioned that because our terms are not obnoxious. They're actually just a paragraph. We're not Apple. We're not, having you like sign away your firstborn. They're really quite reasonable. It's saying like I own this, or I have the.
We do not accept your firstborn.
Yeah, no. You know, I own this. I have permission to put this in. I've gone through IRB for my research, those kind of things. So that's what our terms look like. All right, so if you've agreed, you can upload. Should be pretty fast. PowerPoint. Here we go. Ta-da! So it's been uploaded. And then don't do this, Scott, but if you wanted then to mint a DOI for that, the button's right there. And then it'll just show up right there. Don't do it. So if you scroll back up, if you go into My Works now that we've deposited something.
Because technically this is not your work, it's Neebula's
Oh,
work.
it's Neebula's work. Right.
That's
okay.
why
So it would display here, and you could go in and make changes to it since it's still in draft mode, and publish it when you're ready, and those kinds of things. And here on the ribbon also, this is where you can go in and make collections like we talked about too. And last thing, really quick, if you click on dashboard, I just want to show you, if you scroll down, a little more, this is where you can add your proxies. So somebody who can deposit on your behalf. So if you have a lovely grad student or an administrative assistant who's willing to do it, just have that person log into the system, then you can search for their name and add them to your account. And then they'll be able to deposit for you. So Jake, you can deposit for me.
Deposit for me.
Yes, perfect. All right, so that's what this thing looks like. What questions do people have? Yes, my recent activity.
So you deposited, it's been transferred to Neebula's account because you were depositing as a proxy for her, and
Yep.
you've attached this file to the deposit.
Perfect. Yes.
Suppose someone has deposited a large data set over 2 gigabytes,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to get a copy of it.
Yeah. How do we
Do I
get
have
it
to come to your
out?
office with my disk drive?
So we are working on that problem right now. We don't have a solution yet. We're worried about getting stuff in first. We're doing that in a couple different ways. Some people are giving us guest credentials to their server, for example, and we'll go out and get their stuff and ingest it. What we're looking at doing is possibly setting up a torrenting site, actually, and seeding that so people can download that way. We're also probably going to be set up, I think it's almost certain, as a Globus endpoint. If anybody in here has used Globus, yes, I see lots of head nods. So it's like the big fire hose, right? So you can like move larger data from one place to another. So that's on the very short list. So not ready yet, but definitely working on it. Did you have a question?
So, for example, if you had an administrator who was uploading something, they then cannot go back and double check that all 300 files had been uploaded.
They can actually. So it doesn't appear like to anybody looking at it, but if they were to like browse the system and look at everything, it would show up in the results list for them because they have editing access to it. But yeah, it does not show up in their works because it's not their work.
Right. So if Amy had actually made a deposit as Amy, she could go back to the results list that you saw when she first started showing Deep Blue data, and her submission would appear in that list, but it wouldn't appear to anybody else because it's still in draft mode just for her.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way you can sort of go back and check and be sure that things align the way that you thought they would, things are complete the way that you were before. You go ahead and pull the trigger and publish it for good.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
So your administrator can't go to My Works, but can go to the general viewer. But if it's in draft mode, it will not be in the general viewer.
It will be for the person if they have editing access to it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Have you thought about putting something in My Works that says like, hey, these are things that I have access to as well, so that
Yeah,
it's a little bit easier for the user?
definitely. Definitely. I think we've talked about that, right?
Yeah, we have. So we're using a system called Hydra. And Hydra, like any system, has certain sort of base level functions. And Hydra is repository software that's designed for multiple different types of repositories. And so for the data repository, we still have some things we want to tweak and refine that are appropriate for this repository that we want to see. So Hydra is a larger community of practice that has a lot of different developers at lots of different places. Michigan is a partner in Hydra, so we have the ability to raise concerns and to do some work and contribute code to the larger Hydra repository. So these are the things that we're trying to raise as functionality that we'd like to see for the data, for those who are using it as a data repository.
It's pretty cool. It's open access software, and so we, like what Jake just described, as us contributing to a shared code base. So we could develop that, for example, and then Stanford, who also uses Hydra, could pull that down into their repository and use it. Or maybe Princeton would develop something that we like, and then we can grab it and put it in ours. So it's pretty nice because it's something bigger than ourselves. But I like that suggestion. Yes.
So where is the data? Is there racks of disks under your desk?
No.
It is not under our desk.
South State or someplace like that?
So it's actually in 3 places. It's in ITS, then it is off-site on North Campus. What is that data center called? I always forget. It sounds like a lake name to me.
Yeah, I know it's in North
Harbor
Campus.
Harbor Lake?
Yes, thank you. Yes, exactly. And then actually the tertiary copy is backed up on tape in like deep dark storage.
They still make tape?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's really, really reliable. Hopefully nothing will ever come to tape, but as Scott mentioned, like we really have or was it Jake, whatever, we have the long view, right? So
Yeah, so how long is where is this data going to be 100 years from now if I want to get it back then?
Yeah, good. You have good questions. So what our plan is we'll take everything, and in 10 years, we're going to just take a look at it and review it and make sure it still makes sense to be in Deep Blue data. We're not going to do anything like, oh, this has been cited fewer than X times, we're going to delete it, that kind of thing. But maybe if like a subject-based repository in your area has cropped up in the meantime, and it would make more sense to be in there, because that's where other researchers are looking, we might work with the researcher to migrate it there. We're really taking care and looking at our collections and making sure that it's still a good fit. If it is, we're going to keep holding on to it. It's the kind of bits in, bits out. So long term.
Yeah, I have a question about that plan. I mean, that plan's great, except how you're going to handle faculty that have left the university, that have retired.
Yep. Case by case basis, really. And if the person is no longer around, we'll work with the department or we'll work with the subject librarian. This is very much like a team-based effort. This isn't Jake and I kind of willy-nilly like, we don't like this anymore.
That's not how preservation works.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will do due diligence. So obviously the person who deposited would be our first choice. But if we can't find that person, or that person has retired or, God forbid, passed away, we will look to what is the next best sort of scenario that we can engage with to be sure that we're preserving things of value.
Yeah, we're working really closely with our digital preservation librarian, and writing these policies and procedures with him and with his shop. So we'll be taking good care of this. Yes, Jean.
I have a question. I understand that this is 10 years away, and while I love the idea of job security for librarians, it seems to me like a case-by-case review of the data sets, repository that, like, for all intents and purposes, we hope to grow and just have it be a wonderful resource, rich source of data, like, right? Even if you have a rubric, I mean, I guess I wonder, like, what is the scalability of managing this sort of 10-year review plan, which I completely understand.
Yeah.
And with all the nuances of, well, this guy's not here, and well, this is version 5, and, like, what's the, however, faculty member X hasn't gotten back to me in 6 months, even though I email him every day. I guess, right? Like, I just have a question about scalability, whereas, like, if we're talking about like a traditional collection of our books or whatever, you would take the subject specialist librarian in that area and be like, read this, right? Like, we can store all these books, so you have to make a decision, and they go out and they even talk to the faculty members and whatever. it seems like how is that scaling?
This is a different deal.
I should mention that we're hiring a data workflow specialist to increase our staff. No, but I think you're right, Gene. Really, the model that we have for preservation is based on the library model that we have now. So it's not just, again, Amy or I going through and saying, what do you think? I don't know. It is involving the subject specialist. It is looking at how do we better understand the community with a subject specialist in place, so that our reading practices follow the same along the lines of what we do for reading books and other materials. And the scale of that from practice that can be something that is an investment of time and effort. But we don't see this adding anything more significant than was already in place. I mean, we've been open now for about a year. We have 50 different entries. Some of those are collections, so they're not actually individual data sets. They're amalgamations of individual data sets. Some of the entries we have here are 1 or 2 files. Some are 300 plus. And so clearly, we will face some challenges in the 300 plus things, especially if we get a lot of them. But I think the basic model we have in place in terms of the reading practices of the library is a good starting point to make that happen.
And I think, as we are successful and we get more deposits, that will just, give us leverage to perhaps hire new positions. Like Jake said, we're already hiring someone. I'm working with a grad student now. I think we will just grow as this grows.
And I think too, it's not like we've got this open, we're going to walk away, come back in 10 years and say, oh crap, we've got 8,000 deposits here. What are we going to do? Yeah. So obviously so we've been open for a year. So in 9 years, we're not going to say, okay, now we're going to review 10 years worth of deposits. We're going to do the first year and do sort of a rolling review. So in that first review pass, we're probably going to look at about 50 deposits. Start breaking those down by subject areas, and that means you probably have a number of subject liaisons who are looking at a handful of deposits each. Yeah. That's a manageable workload. And in the meantime, we'll have been keeping track of how much new stuff is coming in. We can look at the workflow process for review in that first year and say, how did this go? Is that going to scale to the number of files we're going to have to review next year? What do we need to do differently? Yeah. So I think, as long as we're keeping track of how much stuff is coming in and thinking proactively in terms of scaling the workflow to suit, we're probably going to be okay, I think. I mean, it would be, if we had the problem where we had too much stuff to review effectively, I think we would view that as a great problem to have.
That would be awesome, yeah.
Yeah. And then we'll figure out what to do with that in the event that happens.
Exactly.
What's your total number? So it's just a very few dozen.
57.
57.
Mm-hmm.
And I think only 52 of those are actual data sets, so the remaining would be collections.
So any notion on just the total disk size?
Oh, total disk size? What has Sebastian said? Nothing is too gigantic. We have several that are in process right now, and we're ingesting them from the back end because they're larger. All of these have gone through the browser. Almost all.
I think with a couple of exceptions, like Pascal did go through this.
Yeah. So most of these have come through the browser, so they're under 2 gigs per file. But we are ingesting 30 terabytes of astronomy data that we're working on right now. So small so far. Mm-hmm.
Track date succession. What I'm thinking, if this really takes off and gets big, you really want to keep everything more time on actively spinning drives.
I think that's one of the questions that would be part of the preservation policy is, yes, this is important, but it's really not getting the kind of use that would justify keeping up an active spinning disk. Maybe that gets moved to tape, and we put a note saying, hey, if you're interested, contact us.
Yeah. But for now, it's all on active.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, the challenging thing here is that there's not a whole lot of models to follow. Yeah. This is a relatively new kind of service. So it's something that we have put plans in place, but we haven't actually had to test those plans yet. And so I'm sure we'll find things where, we thought it would go this way, and in fact it's going that way, and we need to adjust accordingly.
A lot of other universities are looking to Michigan and saying, well, we'll wait and see what happens with you guys. Follow you.
To some extent, we're both building the boat and learning to navigate all the voyages underway with all the challenges that presents.
Fun though.
Oh yeah, good.
Great. All right, any last questions? No, great. Well, thank you so much for having us. And right. That's how you get in touch with us.
Yeah, we're pacing ourselves. Yeah, but we're definitely interested in talking to you. So if there's something that you wish Deep Blue Data did, or you have a question about the type or the amount of data, please do contact us. We're more than willing to try to work with you to satisfy the need.
Community need will drive service development.